more about this with the Middle East security analyst James Denselow. James is in London. Why is Al-Qaeda going after the FSA?
Well, the opposition has always been divided and characterised by what it stood against rather than what it stood for. And I think now perhaps the stresses of the regime's counter-offensive are beginning to tell. I mean, this time last year, the opposition was on the offensive in Damascus. Now we see them in retreat. They might abandon Homs, and perhaps the stresses of this retreat are playing on the divisions between the FSA and the more extremist groups that come under this very kind of low-level hierarchy, networked hierarchy, sorry, of Al-Qaeda. And it seems that we have a real kind of point here where FSA commanders have not just said that they'd committed this, that the Al-Qaeda committed this killing, but also that they will now respond and wipe the floor with them. So it's not one thing to have the regime against you, but to be against yourself makes things even harder.
Just a mere mention of Al-Qaeda involvement is going to be treated very critically in Washington and in Europe when Western and American leaders are considering arms treaties, aren't they?
Exactly, and it makes the momentum even that much harder to reverse. I mean, we had a debate here in the House of Commons yesterday whereby the British Foreign Office Minister said that the rebels would return any weapons given to them. But if the rebels are increasingly dominated by extremist forces, then it seems even harder to see how that would work. There was a very interesting piece in The Guardian earlier this week from a reporter who spent time in the northeast of Syria, who showed that Al-Qaeda groups have taken over large areas of wheat production and gas production. So there's a lot more to this, and the fog of war sort of reveals that within the opposition, extremist forces seem to be on the ascendancy, which of course, as you say, gives big questions as to how easy it will be for the West to support them.
You talk there, Robin, about, in quotes, increasingly dominated by extremist forces. Just tell us a little more about that, because that's the worry, isn't it, outside Syria?
Yes, I think that what we saw originally was that when the Syrian state withdrew from large areas of the country in response to the revolution, that groups from abroad came in, and command and control and people with battle experience in Iraq in particular were very effective about conducting attacks against the regime. And so you've got a combination now of military effectivity and also legitimacy. They rally against corruption, they focus on welfare provision models a bit similar to, say, Hezbollah, and that allows them a certain degree of credibility and ability to sort of dominate certain areas of opposition space, as fragmented as that is. I think now, as I say, the pressures that the opposition are under maybe leads to this more of an internal schism amongst them. The fact that while the West talks a good game about arming and supporting the opposition, Congress is stuck when it comes to the practical side of that, whereas the Saudis and the Qataris and other people in the Gulf are perhaps more direct about supporting these kind of groups. So I think that's, again, the point about momentum is that in the favour of the extremists at this point.
So, lastly, tell us more about this group. It's called the Islamic State of Iraq. That's the group that's been claiming responsibility for killing FSA leaders. And tell us more about its size and what kind of grip or hold it has.
Well, estimates of the Free Syria Army estimate between 40 and 50,000. Nusra Front and the various Al-Qaeda franchises that they don't have a membership list as such, but they do try and attempt to sort of increasingly unify, are estimated to be about 10% of that number. But I think the fact that this was an organised meeting that turned into this bloodbath, and the fact that a week before the FSA said one of their commanders was decapitated by Al-Qaeda in Idlib province, shows you that the tensions are not in terms of open warfare quite yet, but rather organised attempts at trying to counterattack against the regime are descending into this kind of bloodbath. And of course, religious legitimacy is used quite often by these groups. So I think there's a foreign element to it, but also you're seeing a lot of Syrian opposition fighters perhaps move over because they see greater effectivity, better weapons, and a sort of more legitimate type of leadership coming from these groups. So I think it's definitely one to watch in the coming weeks.
Indeed, we will. Middle East security analyst James Denselow. Thanks, James.